and welcome to Notes from the Oracle. I'm Connor, and together with Jack, my co-host from Cabin 6, we're going beyond Half-Blood Hill to take a closer look at the electrifying mythology of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief.
Chapter 4, My Mother Teaches Me Bullfighting. All right, Jack. I don't know about you, but especially in comparison to the last chapter, I was kind of underwhelmed by this one. I'm interested to hear what you think.
It is absurd to hear you say that, Connor, because I think
Really?
this has been the best chapter so far. Legitimately, this is everything that I remember loving about these books, I think has shown the brightest in this chapter. Where as I was reading through it, there were just certain lines or moments that stuck out where I'm like, yeah, this is the good stuff. It's starting to pop off like properly. We're getting into Percy Jackson. So I would say gobsmacked to hear that you found this underwhelming.
I won't say that it was a bad chapter by any means. I did really enjoy it, but me personally, I think it's twofold. I think we're coming off of a chapter that I think is really sitting with me more as an adult, as something that was important to the novel and made me feel really good and I connected with. And I know that the chapter after this one is when we're introduced to Camp Half-Blood. And I think this whole chapter, I was just sitting, can I just turn the page and be at Camp Half-Blood now? Like, hey, it's fine. I know what happens. He kills a Minotaur. Fine. Where's Camp Half-Blood?
No. That's so reductive, dude. Rick does such a beautiful job at conveying action throughout this entire chapter, and it's not flashy. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Everything is concise and perfectly worded. It is visceral. I can picture everything clearly. And he does so in such an economical way with his writing and his choice of words that it impresses me more today than it probably did when I was reading this as, a 10-year-old. So I understand sentimentality and nostalgia and, it's really hitting you in your feels. We talked a lot about that last chapter, and that is very important. And that third chapter does probably mean more to me now than it did when I also first read this book. But dog, he does a backflip and he rips off his horn and he stabs him in the chest. It's rad. It's so cool. The car blows up. I hate that car.
It's all really fun. But yeah, I don't know. You know me. For those at home who don't know, I've never actually been super huge on like the action segments. I'm like, all right, just tell me who won. Then let's move on.
We specifically got into a debate bordering on argument. At least on my end, it was turning into an argument in Disney. Do you remember this? We were waiting in line, I think for Pirates of the Caribbean. And we were talking about the importance and the narrative weight behind fights and action. And I was a huge proponent for there's so much character that can be built in action scenes and action sequences and fights. And you were just, in a way that only Connor can, so dismissively was like, no, that doesn't matter. I want to hear. I want to hear the dialogue. I want to see the emotional weight. And that's not in an action scene. And you're crazy because action scenes convey all of those things and then some. And sometimes they're even more impactful because it's not words, it's actions. It's showing, not telling.
It is showing, not telling. That is the name of the game. In that regard, you are no doubt 100% correct.
And he does a cool backflip and the car blows up. Do I need to emphasize anymore how rad that is?
You're right. That is really rad. But it starts with just a storm and lightning because Zeus is throwing a temper tantrum and Percy is complaining that Grover smells like a barnyard animal.
Yeah. He specifically said that he smelled like lanolin. Do you know what that is? I did not think to look it up. I wonder if lanolin is like, because I know animals that have wool, they secrete like a weird grease. I wonder if that's what it is.
Lanolin is the purified, secreted product of the sheep sebaceous glands. It is called wool wax or wool grease, and it helps with the protection of their skin and coat.
If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I know about secretions, Connor.
Yeah? That's what you know about, Jack?
I've been saying that for years. I know satyr secretions, other secretions. You got a secretion question? I've probably got an answer to it. But that's neither here nor there. Grover smells bad, and he's still not wearing pants.
To be honest, he does smell like wet animal. I feel like no matter which way you slice it, wet animal never smells good. You give a dog a bath, and it's like, how do you still smell disgusting? And it's like, because they smell like wet dog.
That's true. Yeah, no, that'd be tough. And even though I know it's raining a lot outside, you could like crack the window.
Yeah, but you know what? They're on a mission, and opening the window might open them up to whatever is flitting in front and back and forth across the windshield, which I was like, maybe that's a Fury as well as a Minotaur?
So we'll get to that in a second, because I made note of that as well. Before that, though, Percy calls Grover part donkey, and Grover very incredulously says, goat. I'm a goat from the waist down. Now, we're not going to dig into that phrase, but I do like the implication because he said, there are satyrs who would trample you under hoof for such an insult. I do like the idea that Percy accidentally walked into some sort of racism.
No, I caught that. You know what I did find very funny about that whole interaction? So I did a little research on satyrs. We'll get to that later as we kind of go over more of the mythology. But satyrs are in ancient Greek traditional mythology. They're actually part horse, not part goat.
But that's centaurs.
Nope. So centaurs are half horse, half man. Satyrs have horse ears and a horse tail and a horse another thing, but we'll save that for later.
He's
I'm not joking.
I believe you. He just said he's the goat from the waist down. Like,
But yeah, traditionally they were actually part horse people, so even Grover's getting it wrong. Or maybe that's part of why is, he's
now,
used to people getting it wrong.
Notably, you mentioned ears, a tail, a mysterious third thing, but not legs.
Yeah, no, they had human legs in most depictions.
Really?
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, I'll go over this more in depth later, but toward the Renaissance is where we start to get a lot of definitive modern satyr depictions, as we do with a lot of Greek concepts. The Renaissance came about and people were obsessed with it. And so they recontextualized a lot of these things. The idea of a satyr looking like a goat comes from their relation to the god Pan, who is a goat person. So Pan is always described as looking how we modern people look at a satyr and go, goat legs, goat tail, goat horns. That's Pan. At some point throughout history, because Pan is so closely intertwined with satyrs and other nature spirits, we started to attribute the traits of Pan, who has many different forms, they're all goat person, to various satyrs. And that's how we get the modern depiction of satyrs.
Interesting. I did not know that.
What's doubly interesting is that fauns, the Roman concept, now I'm really going off the rails here and spoiling all of my fun facts. Fauns, which are the Roman equivalent of a satyr, started as a completely separate entity. They were actually just ghosts, but then they slowly also got lumped in as nature spirits and lumped in with satyrs, and then eventually that convergence is different versions of Pan and fauns and satyrs all combined into one to give us our modern idea of a goat person satyr that is the same as a faun.
Yeah. The more you know. What I'm
Kinda
hearing is that Rick is a coward for not having Grover be the original form of satyr. That's my takeaway.
I mean, you're telling me. I think that there's some real, Rick does a lot of work to get a lot of things very accurate throughout these books. I think this is a missed opportunity. I think people would have gone, why does he look like that? And you go, oh, because, and then you could give that fun fact spiel that I just gave. And then,
That's right.
kids learn stuff. Isn't that what it's all about? Isn't that what reading
I think
is all
at the
about?
end of the day, that's what it's all about. Exactly. Speaking of learning stuff, check out this transition, Connor. Speaking
I'm
of
ready.
learning stuff, we learn about the mist properly.
We did. Actually, I made a note on this. I caught the line specifically, we put mist over the human's eyes, implying that Grover has some level of control, which I just find interesting because this is a skill that'll take Hazel like half a book to learn. And most demigods never master. And Grover's just casually like, yeah, me and Mr. Brunner, we did that. I suppose Chiron is like ancient. Sorry, I didn't mean
I was going to say, I actually don't think I was going to say anything. But I thought because they were technically don't monsters aren't they better at like utilizing the mist as
That's
opposed
true,
to
they
like
are.
demigods?
That's true. So perhaps that's
Mm-hmm.
why, because Chiron is technically a beast, a creature of some kind. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're better
And
at it.
he is old as dirt. You are
He
correct.
is old, old, old. And Grover, at the very least, has like nature magic that we will consistently see throughout the rest of the series and his appearances. So maybe with his nature
Mm-hmm.
magic, he can control the mist a little bit. But I thought that was interesting that it was like, we put the mist specifically over the human's eyes. And it's like, that's more control than I think we'll see, especially from Grover ever going forward. And so I thought the we in particular was interesting. But I guess if you attribute it as that's probably more a Chiron thing, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that they're like, yeah, we just hoped that you'd think that was a hallucination. So they really did just try and gaslight him for
Oh yeah, they were
ages.
gaslighting him.
Yep.
100%. And
You know
they
what
not
though?
only doubled, they tripled down, even when
They
it
did.
wasn't working.
But at the very least, Grover wasn't gaslighting him about being his friend. I do appreciate that.
He still could be though. At this point, I don't know who to trust. Is that a lie? Is it the truth? Who's to say? You've lied to me the entire time I've known you.
You make a good point, but I feel like at this point, like if somebody shows up at your door and you are a regular mortal, you don't think that any of the Greek mythology is real, and they're a satyr, you just go, you know what? From this point on, everything you say is truth. Like I'll just believe everything. That's
I feel
where I
like
would
I'd
be
be
at
more
least.
skeptical. See, and that's where we diverge once again because I feel like I'd be more skeptical. I'd be like, you look like some sort of fey trickster creature, and you're going to try and steal my organs and replace them with straw and sawdust. I do not trust you. Do you know more than me right now at this moment? Probably, considering the fact that I didn't realize you were half goat. However, I'm going to keep you at an arm's length because I don't know what else is happening here. You could be trying to take advantage of me. You could be trying to lure me into some sort of weird Faustian deal that I currently am too ignorant to understand. But see, I would weaponize my ignorance. I would use that to be skeptical, and I would use it to be scrupulous, and I would be diligent in everything I did.
I will say, for what it's worth, I think that's a much smarter approach than what I would take in your position.
Your approach is a lot more whimsical.
It is. I'd be
that's
like, oh
that's why
boy,
you'd be a better
journey.
protagonist. Yeah.
You could be the Lancer questioning everything.
Oh God. Yep. Can't escape that role.
Um,
We also learn that the Lord of the Dead
yep.
and a couple bloodthirsty minions are after Percy. Uh,
Bloodthirstiest.
Bloodthirstiest. My apologies. They're not just bloodthirsty. They are the most bloodthirsty.
He's pulling out all the stops, apparently. Although I did
He
find it
is.
interesting. Grover immediately is like, this has got to be Hades' fault. Talk about a guy with a bad brand.
Yeah. Well, the Furies. I feel like that's probably the most immediate
Yeah, they do
like
work
sign.
pretty specifically for him, huh?
It's like his secretaries, right?
So technically, their duty is to punish living mortals. So not really,
Yeah, like
but like,
secretaries.
yeah, I'll give it to you. Do you have a secretary that punishes people for you?
I'm just thinking of like the DMV, you know? Like that's
Oh
probably Hades'
God.
domain.
Yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
Hades,
A
ruler of
liminal
the underworld, and
space. Yeah.
also the DMV.
And also the DMV, this awful liminal space between life and death where it's just kind of torture.
I feel like when the DMV was invented, they had to draw lots again, and he pulled in. He was like, "You've gotta be kidding me."
You serious? They're like, yeah, well, because you know DMV they deal with motor vehicles, cars. They're on the ground, right? You're kind
Yep.
of the ground guy.
And I'm like, "Wow, thanks, guys."
I wonder if Zeus was super jazzed about the TSA. You think he likes having that?
Um, it's a good question. I don't think he cares. I think Zeus is so petty. Like, he is intimidating. He comes on the page and he scares the hell out of you. I don't think he cares about things like the TSA. I think he looks at that and goes, "You silly mortals, your little science. I'm going to blow your plane out of the sky.
I
Stop me,
feel
I
like
dare you."
I feel like he'd like the control. He'd be like, ah, yes, let's make it even more arduous and tedious to come into my domain.
You know what? I do like that as well. You wish to enter my domain? You must go through
You
Zeus's
must deal through.
TSA.
That's right.
Oh my god, that's why you can't bring liquids on planes.
That's
Because he
right.
doesn't want you bringing
Because
Poseidon's
he doesn't want
nonsense up into
Poseidon stuff.
his sky.
That's exactly right. See, we're cracking the code.
We can take our conspiracy helmets off now.
We still had him on? You didn't take 'em
Oh,
off?
I started with it on this chapter. My bad. That was just me.
Dude, yeah. No wonder you're going off the rails.
No, I did think that like all of this implication that this is Hades' fault is really fun. Then we race past the pick your own strawberry sign, which I find fun. I just always love the image of Camp Half-Blood just having these rolling strawberry fields surrounding it, which we will obviously have explained next chapter as being a side effect of Dionysus being there.
Which I just like totally forgot about.
He's banned from growing grapes, so that's why they grow strawberries instead.
Yeah.
So he's not allowed to have anything alcohol related or even grow grapes. And so instead, they have verdant fields of strawberries.
That's just totally left my mind over the years.
I always find it fun because that's like the whole reason that Camp Half-Blood is just surrounded by fields and fields of them.
Oh,
And as
yeah,
they're going
super
through those
funny.
fields and fields, that's when you have the dark fluttering shape now lost behind them in the storm, which, I don't know many Minotaurs to flutter, so my immediate instinct was, I think that's Alecto again. I think she's back onto them.
Was that your interpretation of it? I have no idea what the answer is. And honestly, part of me was hoping that you did research to be like, yes, I actually dug through, and in 4 books they reference that it was the blah blah blah.
So I will at least give you the solace in knowing I tried. This is never referenced again.
Okay.
So far as I could find, there's no moment that's like, oh, and that was definitely the same Fury. She's back. She's tracking them down. There are other references throughout this book to the Furies specifically trying to track Percy down, which is why I'm under the impression that that's probably a Fury, but it's never confirmed. So, grain of salt and all that.
Gotcha. And I guess, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. And Percy doesn't have a whole lot of time to think about it because they get smitten, smited. They get
Smited?
shot with
Smited or
lightning.
smote? Yes.
They get blowed up by lightning.
They
which
get the Zeus special.
They get the Zeus special. Moving car, moving target. Great shot on the part of Big Z. He's a whiz with that lightning. I looked it up because I was curious to see if it was more or less likely to be struck by lightning in a moving vehicle. And it is the exact same chance. It's just lightning striking. There is no greater or lesser statistical chance of you being hit or not in a moving vehicle.
You know what does increase your chance of being struck by lightning?
Holding up a metal rod in an empty field.
Oh, I was going to say being a child of Hades or Poseidon.
That
also
tends to give a
true.
bad track record. At least in
That's
these.
true. I feel like we're both right.
Yeah, no, I think also holding a metal rod in a lightning storm would also increase your chances of being struck by lightning. It's just that being named Percy Jackson also happens to increase your chances.
That's true. But we don't have time to talk about the statistical significance of that because the car is just screwed. It's done. It's not going anywhere. Yeah. Yep. Not a scratch. Ringing in his head. Not a scratch.
I did love that. I loved that. And Percy's just like, oops.
There was, and this is, not a clutch my pearls moment, but there is a description of Grover being slumped over and blood trickling from the side of his mouth, which is, that's a little graphic. Got a little bit of blood trickling going on.
Say, you'll have that, but I did note that the actual eventual killing of the Minotaur is pretty PG, with another monster just poof, disappearing into dust. But Grover goes through the ringer in this accident. I mean, he gets tossed around like a rag doll. Poor guy.
Hey, and that's a lesson to all of you listeners. Click it or ticket, all right? And that's not just supposed to be like because police are trying to fill up their ticket quotas. Well, that is true. But it's also because your chance of survival in a car accident increases exponentially if you're wearing your seatbelt. You also have a greater chance of avoiding injury. So make sure you do that, even if you're a satyr.
I have nothing to add. That's a great point. You should always wear a seatbelt.
Always wear a seatbelt. That's right. And I think
Even
that's
if,
the thesis of the book.
yeah, even if you think that's the thesis of the book, even if you're a satyr, wear a seatbelt.
Even if you're a satyr, wear a seatbelt. That's exactly right.
That's a good tagline.
That is. That sounds like the name of a chapter, honestly.
It does.
The description of the Minotaur. I thought this was so creative. This is one of those things where sometimes I'll read a book and there's a description of something that makes me mad that I just know I would never be able to think of something that way. But it just makes so much sense. And the way that Rick describes this dark silhouette of a huge guy, like a football player, and he was like holding a blanket over his head because his top half was bulky and fuzzy, and he had his hands raised up under the blanket or above the blanket, so it looked like he had horns. So it just looks like this crazy guy with like a shawl covering his face and putting up his hands like he was like, I don't know, like a moose or something, and just running at them at high speeds. It's silly, but the thought process of like reverse engineering, okay, what would this look like to somebody who is one in the rain at
Yep.
like night,
In the rain, in the dark,
and has never seen a Minotaur before, right? Like it's not something that would cross their mind as reality.
yeah.
And Rick landing on this specific description is just so good. It's so smart. It makes sense, and it just tickled me. I really enjoyed that.
I honestly, I wish I had more to say other than you're so right. I think that everything about the way the Minotaur is described is really well done. I mean, it's a little bit later on, but you get the description of the bright white fruit of the looms, how his body looks like he belongs on the cover of a Muscle Man magazine,
Mm-hmm.
or the fact that the horns with points you just couldn't get from an electric pencil sharpener, which is just that's a shot fired. That's how you can tell Rick was a teacher. Is he's like,
Mm-hmm.
don't use those electric pencil sharpeners. That's not going to do the trick. You need one of these manual guys.
You gotta crank that. That's right. Uh-huh. But see, that's exactly, and you hit on another quote. It's just quintessential Rick writing for Percy Jackson. It's
Mhm.
just the imagery is so, again, simple, universal, and evocative in a way that I am jealous I don't think of things that way. And this was the chapter where I feel like we started to just see that more and more and more.
Yeah. No, and it's phenomenal. It's really well done.
Another thing that stuck out to me, and this is just a very minor aside, there is reference to the pine tree on top of Half Blood
Yep.
Hill, and it is described as a huge White House Christmas tree sized pine. Now, that's interesting. When I think of a big Christmas tree, I do not necessarily think of the White House. I think of a very important icon of New York, which is Rockefeller Center and their Christmas tree. Perhaps that tree that they put up in the Rockefeller Center for Christmas is just too big. It's usually like between 70 and 100 feet. So maybe that was just a little overkill. But
Yeah.
I just found that interesting that in this incredibly, first part of the book at least, very New York book, makes reference to something else as
Just a
opposed
completely
to the
different.
incredibly New York Christmas tree. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen either in person, so I'm left only with my memory, or not my memory, my imagination as to what a giant pine tree, thankfully not that hard to imagine,
I was going to
looks
say, it's
like.
pretty easy. It's not a huge leap in imagination.
No. But I could picture something presidential. That's a pristine, that's a presidential pine tree.
Like what? It's going to bomb people across the globe? What does that even mean? A
I don't know.
presidential pine tree?
It's proper. They're picking one that's nice, it's upright, it's sturdy looking. I feel like they would pick a presidential pine tree, and that's
You
what
have
Zeus
such
would want
a
for his daughter.
you have such a beautiful, hopeful view of the American presidency, Connor. Bless you.
Oh, I don't. I don't. Don't mishear me. I think that's what they're trying to project. It's very
I
easy to pick a
see.
tree that
I
represents
see.
your values.
If you're trying to, this is like if George Washington was a tree. I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. If the government said, "Hey, go buy me a tree. Here, you've got basically unlimited money we're putting in front of the White House. You'd buy a nice tree. You would buy a presidential tree.
I see. I understand.
I will say the one thing that I found interesting about the reference to the tree is because immediately Sally sees this and she says, just beyond that hill, get past that tree, which is interesting to me because Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth, when they get here with Grover to Camp Half-Blood, that's when Thalia becomes the tree. So that implies that it's not just her knowledge from like 12 years ago when Percy was born and Poseidon was giving her instructions, that she knows where Camp Half-Blood is. And they do mention that like she's been in communication with Chiron and Grover, so it's interesting that one of the things they might have told her was, you just got to get beyond that big old tree. I don't know. I don't think it's a huge detail or anything, but I thought it was interesting. The fact that
Oh,
she knows
yeah.
the way at all, kind of, I was like, why does she know how to get there if she's never been? She's never been.
Mhm.
She's never met Grover before. They've kind of been made aware of one another's existence, but they haven't interacted properly. I thought it was
Yeah,
interesting.
I agree. I think it shows more of what we were already kind of seeing last chapter with Sally. She knows her stuff. She's not exactly an outsider to this whole,
She does.
world of
And
gods and
apparently she's
myths.
been studying monsters too.
Yes, she, with the fear of several gods in her, says, "Oh God, they really want you dead." I didn't realize how bad it was for them to call out this guy.
And yet, here they are being stared down by what is described as, at least in this book, as a pretty formidable foe. It's a big deal that Percy will end up taking down a giant 7-foot tall Minotaur.
Oh yeah. Well, he's described as, you mentioned it earlier, like something from the cover of a Muscle Man magazine. Bulging biceps and triceps and a bunch of other seps, all stuffed like baseballs under vein-webbed skin. That means he's dehydrated. If
That's
he's too
disgusting, yeah.
vascular, that means he's got to drink water. And my favorite little part, he wore no clothes except underwear. I mean, bright white Fruit of the Looms, which would have looked funny, except that the top half of his body was so scary. Now, these bright white Fruit of the Looms, Connor,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to put on your English degree hat, okay?
Oh, I'm
And we're
ready.
going to dig far too deep into what we think these tidy whities represent.
I'm already there. Do you want my answer?
Yes.
So the original myth of the Minotaur, Poseidon gives King Minos of Crete a bright white bull, a notably beautiful bright white bull. And this bull is so pretty that all the people of Crete choose Minos over his brothers to be king of Crete. So I think that this is a reference to the Minotaur's heritage because that bright white bull will be seduced by Minos' wife, Pasiphae, and they get it on, and they have a son, and that son is the Minotaur. So he's just he's repping his dad's colors. That's what's going on.
Now, Connor, I want to make it abundantly clear. I did not know any of that, but I just knew in my heart of hearts that you would have some sort of information based on these bright white Fruit of the Looms. I am not disappointed. I don't know that I've ever been happier with you, honestly.
I mean, that's what I
I
got.
have
I think it's a
nothing to
reference to
add.
that. I think
I
it's
agree.
showing
You got
his
it.
tormented soul. You know, he's
There we
split.
go.
He's a man split between his perfect bull father and his broken human mother, who has her
His
own set of
horny,
problems
horny
that are
mom.
not. Well, that's not her fault, to be fair.
I
The
mean, I
gods
guess he
got
did
mad
get
at
the
her.
horns also from the bull. So,
He did also get the bull's horns, which are, as mentioned, like they came out of a pencil sharpener.
mm-hmm.
They also mentioned the gleaming brass ring, the septum piercing, which I always find funny because my brother has a septum piercing, and when he first got it, all I ever thought was about this scene. Actually, I thought about the big bad CGI Minotaur from the movie.
Yes,
You know the one.
I do know the one.
It's just every time I saw it, I was like, that's where my brain was immediately. I'm sorry if you're listening.
Again, I'm not sorry because that is incredibly funny. So we learned that it's this Minotaur. Percy is gonna say, he's gonna name drop the Minotaur because he learned about it in class. He's retained some information. He's not a bad student. He actually learned something. He's about to say it, and Sally says, "Don't say his name because names have power." Now, Connor, I'll lob this very easy pitch back to you. Names have power. What do you think that means? What do you derive from that?
You want my honest answer, Jack?
I do.
I wrote, this rule doesn't really stick if I remember correctly.
It sure doesn't.
This comes up in this book, and like in this book only. And every time they do it, I'm like, but what power do those names have? In later books, I think what will actually end up happening is when you talk about a monster or a god, especially gods, it makes them aware of you. So you and I taunting Zeus about not wanting liquids on planes because, that's his domain. That would be the type of thing where Zeus would hear that. He'd be like, what are you guys talking about me for? And so that's where I think this names have power sentence comes from, because it'll get brought up again when Percy starts meeting more and more people in like Camp Half-Blood and all that. But as you get to the later books, they're like, oh, you're such and such person. And they just say it. And so I think what that is by the time they get to the later books, they're like, oh, these are tools. You're already standing right in front of me. What are you going to do? Come here? You're already here. You're going to smite me if you're going to smite me. I'm not taunting you. And so I think this will eventually kind of be converted to a more don't tempt fate, don't taunt the gods, which I think is a good lesson. But I don't think it ever gets used outside of, like, again, not even the whole book, I think. Like, the first half of the book is how this gets used like this. And they're like, oh, don't say that. Names have power. And by next book, they're like, oh my gosh, I know who you are. You're so-and-so. And they're like, you got me. There goes my disguise. Names have power. Now you can see through the mist and see who I really am. So it's like, if anything, I think the knowledge of what these things are will end up being a benefit to our heroes across the books. So
yes. And it's interesting you bring that up because names have power to me makes me think of the concept, the trope of true names. Now, do you know about true names?
I do. That trope actually gets used in the Kane Chronicles, but continue.
I don't remember that, but great. Awesome. Way to be consistent, Rick. True names, and it's a trope where it's effectively if you know or invoke the actual name, not just a title, not a pseudonym, but the name. It is like bound spiritually to you. It is cosmically intrinsic to your being. That can either give that person or thing that owns the name power, or it can give you power over that thing. And we see this a lot in other types of religions and mythology. A more modern example, in the grand scheme, modern example would be like Rumpelstiltskin. That classic folklore, what's my name? You'll know his name and he, explodes or whatever.
I don't think that's what happens, but close enough.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happens. Another example that is far more, we'll say, commonplace, not modern in its creation, but modern in its practice. Christian God, Genesis. Book 1, God said, let there be light. It is a capital L, and there was light. So God named the thing before it was made. So naming, logically speaking, would be necessary towards creation of something. And then, later in Genesis, God gives man, humanity, the right to name all of the animals and also gives them dominion over all animals. So in the Judeo-Christian faith, names hold power for those who are able to wield them, which seems, again, different from this version where invoking somebody's name almost invokes their essence or asserts their dominance as opposed to wielding dominance over them. Except for, I guess, in later books you mentioned that they use names to like shatter disguises. So maybe it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
What I do think is interesting is, especially with the way you're talking about the Judeo-Christian use of it, that lines up very heavily with the Egyptian
Mhm.
novels in the series, where they are magicians. They're not demigods, they are fully human, and so it's a bigger deal to have control over these supernatural powers. And so when they actually do magic, they cast spells, they need, like, if you want a spell to take, the big villain is Set. If you want Set, the god of chaos, to have your magic actually affect him, you have to know his name. You have to know his true name and have power over him with it.
I remember next to nothing from the Kane Chronicles. That was a series that I read maybe once growing up and just didn't go back. I wasn't as voracious for it as I was for Percy Jackson. But I do know that, one of the chief myths around true names is Isis poisoning Ra
Yup.
and would only give him the antidote when he revealed his true name to her. And because of that, Ra became terrified of Isis because she basically held the keys to everything with him. Not just like life or death, but like his entire being. She just kind of
Yeah.
had that on lock.
So, yeah, names, they have power, apparently, though not that much. Not in this book.
Yeah, but it's an interesting concept. Maybe it matters now. We'll throw some benefit of the doubt. Maybe it matters now because by Percy not recognizing them, it can buy them a little more time before Percy becomes really
Oh,
smelly, you know?
I like that. No, actually, when you put it that way, especially when you take into the consideration that I think a lot of what names have power means in the Greek side of this world, where it makes creatures and gods aware of you. For Percy, who Sally is trying to keep hidden, that would make a lot of sense. That it's just like, don't say that. They'll know you're here,
Yep.
and that would be really, really bad.
Hmm.
That there you go.
So there
That's
we
my
go.
head canon. I like that.
That's the
Done.
answer. We did it.
We solved it. Puzzle solved.
You're welcome, Rick. We did it.
Thanks,
Unless
Jack.
you planned for that, Rick, in which case, thank you. So we go to the Bull Man. I like how even in writing, as he's thinking, he doesn't call it the Minotaur now.
Yep.
He just calls it the
Yep.
Bull Man. He's looking through the car and he's snuffling and nuzzling, which is adorable. And we learn that he goes by smell because his sight and hearing are terrible. Now, if there is actual mythological precedent for that, because he was like hidden in a labyrinth, then, we'll get to that a bit later. Is that a thing though? And again, if there's more details associated with that concept, then we'll touch on that at the end. But like, just if there's a quick answer, like, is there a reason for that, or was it just plot?
The quick answer is nope.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there's no like mythological, oh, the Minotaur is like, hunts Theseus by smell. Nope, it just eats kids. That's what it does. It lives in a cave. Oh, well, it lives in a maze in a cave and eats kids. There you go. That's the short version for sure.
I see. Okay, well that's good to know. Well, he's
Um,
snuffling and nuzzling, and
which is the
then
second time the word snuffling is in this book, because the first time we get it is when Chiron and Grover are looking for Percy in chapter 2.
and they're snuffling for him.
Yep. Specifically, I
I
can go
didn't
find it if you want.
realize. No, if you want to find it, go ahead. But this is when we start getting to some like proper action. So the Bull Man, he's bellowing in rage. He picks up the Camaro by the torn roof specifically, so he's got a good handhold on it. The chassis is creaking and groaning. You can just like feel the weight of it. And he raises it over his head and he throws it down the road. And then it slams into the wet asphalt and it skids in a shower of sparks for half a mile before it stops. And I like that he says it stops first and then the gas tank explodes, which is not only very action movie, it's also incredibly funny. That's
It
just such
is.
a slight little bit of comedic timing, which in books, I feel like having comedic timing is a bit hard to pull off. So
And it works
kudos to
here.
Rick for being silly.
Indeed. I
And then,
found
of
it, by the
course,
way.
oh, okay.
Percy opened the nearest door and slipped inside. This is when he's hiding. And then a few seconds later, I heard a slow clop, clop, clop like muffled wood blocks, then a sound like an animal snuffling right outside my door. So, 4
Rick setting
chapters,
precedent for snuffling.
snuffling used twice. Sorry,
Hey.
totally not relevant. But I was like, yep,
No, that's great.
happens
Update
twice.
the wikis, everybody. Monsters snuffle. They don't smell, they're snuffling when they're looking for demigods.
But we were at comedic timing and cars exploding, which I
You were at
agree.
comedic timing. Cars
I mean,
explode after skidding to a stop, and then, of course, not a scratch. I remember Gabe saying, oops.
again, I love sassy Percy. He's just like, yeah, I don't care. Oh no, your car.
Now, this is where we see, and we've already, again, kind of like been intuiting that Sally is a badass, just
Oh yeah,
by sheer force of will and grit for dealing with a horrible life. But here, she's in like action mode, and she's been in action mode the entire chapter. She's very focused,
absolutely.
but now she's making a game plan for, okay, we are now on foot. What do we got to do to get you up the hill? Also, she's got bestiary level information. She's read the character notes on the Minotaur.
Yeah,
He
no
can't,
kidding.
she says, he can't change directions very well once he's charging. So jump out of the way sideways. She's giving him video game tips and tricks.
Honestly, my first thought was, I wonder if she read that on a Mythomagic card. It's
Oh my
the game
gosh,
that
I
Nico
forgot
plays.
about those. Yes. My
That Percy
synapses
also
just
likes.
started. Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Connor, my synapses, they were covered with dust and they just sprung back to life like an old generator. When you said that, I totally
Yep.
forgot that was a thing.
So I was like, I don't know. I was trying to think of like where else she would get this. I mean, obviously she could go read the myths, and no doubt Sally clearly shows that she is well prepared for this moment. So I'm sure she has. You know, she's read all the history books and everything. But I like to imagine that something so specific as that in like a combat sense. She was reading, she was like, that was on the bottom text of a Mythomagic card. She was like, okay, charging, can't move. I'm sure whoever made this was a demigod. So I believe it.
She really was kind of like doomsday prepping for Percy, huh?
Oh yeah. I mean, genuinely, I feel like any monster could have showed up here and she'd have been like, all right, here's its weaknesses. Here's what we got to do. She's ready.
She's such a badass. We love Sally
Yeah,
Jackson.
we do love Sally Jackson.
And
But
she's doing modern warfare. She's shouldering Grover, who's barely conscious, trudging through the high grass and the rain, lightning's cracking in the distance. Like she is rad. And
oh yeah.
honestly, if I were Percy, obviously Percy already has a lot of respect for his mom. But this would be like newfound heights of like, I will never disobey you. I will be the most model child capable. I will do whatever I can within my ability to be perfection for you because you are a superhero.
I mean, I eventually compare her to Gandalf as the moment where, unfortunately, she does get caught by the Minotaur, and she caught my eyes, managed to choke out one last word, "Go!" And all I could hear in my head was, "Fly, you fools!"
Fly, you fools.
I mean, she
Yeah,
gets
well,
a Gandalf moment, and it's awesome.
it is really cool. And it's so funny that you mentioned that it's similar to Gandalf because I noted the exact same thing.
Yep. I did think it was interesting that we obviously get a very different description for her dissolving before Percy's eyes in a shimmering golden form, as if she were a holographic projection, a blinding flash, and she was simply gone. Which is like, I like that. You get the little bit of setup. It's like, oh, all the monsters die by going into a puff of smoke. Maybe Sally's goodness, her smoke is just gold. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's this gross and dirty, but no, she is still alive, which is good. We don't know that. Neither does Percy, because now the demigod instincts are really kicking in. He's
Now,
about to.
before we get to how rad this next like scene is, I am curious because we know that having read this before, Hades has spirited away Sally.
Yep.
That is what the flash of light was. Now, why didn't he just do that earlier? Did he need the Minotaur to like grab her? Is that explained? Did he just
So
want the theatrics?
it's because she's close to death, and that's where his domain starts.
Okay, so she
he
was
as
going to die.
Yes, he as purveyor of death had the authority to go. You're not actually ready yet. Come here.
Isn't that more Thanatos?
I mean, it super is, but he's not in this book. He doesn't appear for another 6 books. If you throw in the Kane Chronicles, he's like 9, because he shows up in Son of Neptune.
I see. Okay.
So, yeah, that is totally Thanatos' domain. Although I think you could also argue something that because the fates determine when you inevitably die, and Thanatos is just like the usher of that perhaps Hades could sense that, like, oh, the fates aren't actually killing you, but you're close to death. That means you must be mine. That's what I'm running with, personally.
So he's got a loophole. It's the death loophole.
Yes. I do have a different avenue that I think also works to kind of explain this. He takes her at this exact moment because it makes it very clear to Percy that what was about to happen was she was about to be dead. And if she's about to die, then Percy can only go one place to look for her. And
I see.
Hades specifically does want Percy's attention because Hades' Helm of Darkness has also gone missing. It's not just the lightning bolt. So Hades thinks that Percy stole both of them and is like, yeah, come on down to my domain. Give me back what I stole. I'll give you your mother for it. So that's why I think he does it in this exact moment.
I see. I can't help but feel like Hades is putting a lot of unearned respect on Percy's intelligence.
I mean, he's omnipotent. Well, the gods aren't omnipotent, but they know much more than mortals. So maybe he knows that he's going to venture forth with Annabeth, and he's like, she'll figure it out. He's a moron.
We're going to trust Annabeth. Percy's an idiot, but he'll be around smart people.
He's a lovable idiot, but like, yeah, she's going to have to do all the heavy lifting in terms of the thinking department. He can do the actual heavy lifting.
So after that, we get to just proper action. There really isn't anything, at the very least to me, that sticks out as like more profound than anything else. It's just really fun. We get to see Percy not just thinking on the fly. He's a gamer for sure, because he knows if there's a big enemy that charges, you got to have him run into a wall. So he puts his back up against the pine tree and is like, I'm going to jump out of the way. Last second, he'll run into the tree and presumably not chase us anymore. He didn't get that far. He's Percy. He didn't get that far ahead. And truthfully, it wouldn't matter either way because he's going to get clotheslined no matter what. This guy's arms, so long. He's just going to get snatched. So this is where we get to see, outside of his quick killer instinct strike against the Fury, Alecto, his instincts kicking in. His spider sense, he does a cool flip. He lands on the back of the Minotaur. And I do like how for his inner monologue, as the Minotaur's like freaking out and bucking and wants to get him off his back, Percy's like, he could just squash me against the tree. Like he could just turn around and just press me against this big, thick pine tree and I would be dead almost instantly. Which again goes to show Percy is a natural born killer. He is not just thinking of ways he can best this beast in front of him. He's thinking, if I was this beast, here's how I'd kill him.
You make a good point. I see, and I thought you were going to talk about the line where he says, how did I do that? I didn't have time to figure it out.
It is instinct. It's demigod instinct, killer instinct, whatever you want to call it. It's coming in clutch.
Absolutely.
And this is just feral instinct. He rips the horn off. I don't think that's anything demigod related. I think that's Percy just being a brute.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he mentions that rage filled him like high octane fuel. If you're putting a D&D class to that, somebody slap this man with some barbarian rage, because that's what's happening.
He took a dip in barb. He definitely took a dip in barb. That's right.
But then he's got a ragged bone weapon the size of a knife, using the pencil sharp point of the horn as a dagger to kill the monster that you pulled the horn from. Yeah, that's pretty sick.
It's raw. He's like Kratos. He's freaking God of War here. It's so rad.
Yeah.
And speaking of God of War, I can't help but feel like Ares would have been looking at this, like watching and just being like, that was pretty good. Like that was really cool.
I don't like the kid, but I gotta hand it to him. That was.
I'll give you credit where it's due.
See that.
You are a violent, fucked up little guy, and I respect that.
And he is.
He kills him.
Effectively, what would probably be, I mean, what's right on your rib, like a liver? Stabs him
Well,
in the
he
liver.
shot
That
it
can't be
right up under the furry rib cage. That could mean he went to stab him under the ribs and through the heart, which,
Yeah.
fun fact, very similar to how actual bullfighters try to kill bulls. Now, the anatomy is different because this Minotaur has the torso of a man. But bullfighters, with their sword or their spear, will attempt to aim in between the shoulder blades. And if they aim just right, they can nick the aorta, which is just like an instant kill because they want to get a swift kill. So Percy, maybe unbeknownst to him, maybe it's because he is a psychopath, like I've been saying, goes for the instant kill by driving this horn up underneath the ribs and through the heart.
It's good instincts. Again, it's those demigod instincts. He's out for blood. And you know what? He's trying to save his life, right? He's fighting for his life. Quickest kill. That's the smartest way to do it.
Hey, I'm not arguing the efficiency. It's just a little scary how efficient he is.
Yeah. But unfortunately, once he does do the thing, he's back to being a regular 12-year-old. He's crying,
He's back to
he's
being,
calling
yeah.
for his mom. I mean, this is sad. But you know what I did? I respect the hell out of it. I held on to Grover. I wasn't letting him go. Throughout all of this, Percy just fought a Minotaur. He could have just ran. He was right there back to the tree. All he had to do was take 2 steps beyond the tree over Half-Blood Hill, and he's safe. Doesn't matter. Minotaur can't get in. Instead, he stayed and fights. 1, because, as you said, pure rage monster. But 2, because he at his core, he is a good person, right? Grover is his one friend. He is doing the right thing. He has to save him.
Yeah, I will acquiesce. That is heroic. Even if it came about through means of incredible violence, bloodlust, he was a good friend to Grover in that moment. That is true.
You know,
and then he passes out.
And then he passes out, which, like, valid. Actually, this has made me think about something. So, a lot of Greek heroes have a very specific flaw. And for most of them, it ends up being, like, hubris. One specific difference is specifically Heracles, who isn't his big thing is never hubris, it's wrath. And I mentioned last time as well, Percy does get to do quite a few similar to Hercules. I mean, he literally does some of the labors of Hercules across the series. This is one of those moments that really shows again. Percy is kind of having a comparison to that pinnacle of the Greek demigod hero, what it should be. You think Greek hero, you think Heracles. And I think it's interesting then that Percy, he could have just left. He could have saved himself, done the smart thing, not pissed off a giant man bull more than it already was, and done the safest possible thing. And instead, he resorts to wrath, violence, and you know what? I wonder if we'll see some instances later in this book and other books of that wrath specifically getting him in trouble. Because I don't think I've ever read with that lens before. And like, obviously, surprise, surprise, wrath is not usually seen as a good thing. But I would be interesting because here it benefits him. 100% he comes out better for it. But I'll be interested to see if that is always the case.
That is definitely going to be something I look out for as well. Another thing I'm going to be looking out for is my favorite character in the entire series.
And there she
Annabeth
is.
Chase. There she is, finally.
I was so excited. And I think that's part of why it's like I really want to get to the next chapter. I want to meet Annabeth. I want to have her and Percy starting to get to know one another. I find it so fun that Percy's very first thing is he sees her and he's like, that's a pretty girl.
That's pretty.
Yum. He has one track brain all the time.
What a dog. What a dog. Come on. Didn't even try and figure out her personality. Just saw her as a pretty face. Shake my head, Percy. You're better than that. Or maybe you're not. Actually, you know what? Percy isn't better than that.
Yeah.
You're a pig. You're a pig, Percy.
He's also the chosen one, as we'll note right here. He's the one. He must be.
He must be.
And also, I don't know what Chiron is trying to hide. Silence, Annabeth. He's still conscious.
He just I think he likes control. I think he just likes having control over the narrative. He wants to make things mysterious.
Given that he has been doing this for years and years and years, I wouldn't be surprised if he's just it's more fun when they don't.
And that, I think, is the chapter.
That is the chapter. Jack, why don't you join me as we enter Camp Half-Blood? We head over the hill and we sit down out front on the porch of the big house. So I touched on this already. We're going to go in order. So we're going to start with satyrs because at the very beginning, Grover's very adamant. He's a satyr. He's a goat person, okay? Not a donkey. You racist Percy. But satyrs have a couple of key features. So there are the more surface level ones, which are they were companions of Dionysus. So they've always been heavily related to Dionysus. They're often depicted alongside him as members of like his posse, effectively. They indulge in all of the same sorts of things that Dionysus approves of and expects of his cult members. They do a lot of drinking, merriment in general, sex, but their depictions have changed a lot over time. But in most original Greek depictions, you go look at like old pottery, old art, it shows them pretty much all looking the exact same. They are balding, so they're always men. So satyrs are specifically male nature spirits, where nymphs are specifically female nature spirits, which is why satyrs often try to court nymphs, which is actually something that we will see pretty consistently across the novels and this series as a whole, because the two satyrs that we really get to know are Grover and Coach Hedge, and both end up in long-term relationships with nymphs. So that's nice. Little continuity like that. But anyhow, as I was saying, they're almost always bald or balding. They have bestial faces. Because they are originally depicted as horse people, they have mane like really long hair whenever you see them and snub noses. So that's how you can tell someone is a satyr. The other way that you can see someone is a satyr, because in all of this ancient art, they do. They have human legs and feet, Jack. They also have a usually very large and fully erect penis in every single depiction. I was not expecting this. I'll be honest, this isn't a part of Greek mythology that I've spent a lot of time on, that I've done a lot of research into before. I didn't expect to be looking at so many phallic paintings of satyrs this morning when I was finishing up my research for this chapter. Because they're nature spirits, so they're not like heroes have the luxury of being human, and humans can be depicted either as nude to show heroism or not nude to just show your average Joe. Well, nature spirits, to indicate that they are nature spirits and therefore free and natural, never wear clothes. So every single one of these photos has horsetail, pointed horse-like ears, and something else like horse sticking right up
I'm looking
there.
at these pictures, and they are very excited.
Yeah. Yep.
This one, I'm looking at
So
one.
that does beg the
I'm looking at
question.
one. This guy is like
Oh, yeah, you go.
balancing a cup on it, which is
Oh, are you looking at the guy who's balancing a cup
yeah,
of wine
yes,
on top?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Yeah. Take it in. It's
they
something.
are having a great time.
They are. What's really interesting is how this specifically, now obviously this is a children's book, so that makes sense that we're going to change some parts
You
of
don't
this
want
depiction,
Grover
specifically
balancing
him wearing
his
clothes.
balancing a cup. You don't think that would play over well?
To be honest, at this point, I would find that really funny.
It's just like we're like 5 books in, and he's like, "Hey, Percy, check this out."
Check out
Yeah,
what I can
but
do.
you didn't know I was able to do that. It's like, Grover, dude, that
Grover, when did you practice that? When we were in the Lotus
yeah, it was just
Hotel.
there was
Don't
some
worry
crazy
about it.
stuff happening, man. He's like, wait a minute, Grover, I just realized I never see you wear sweatpants. Is that because of
But eventually, satyrs will go from the more traditional horse-like depiction to depictions that are goat people. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. The first of which is because they are associated with Pan. So you know who Pan is, I
Mhm.
presume, Jack. He's god of nature, for those of you who don't know. And actually, it's a big plot point in the story that all of these satyrs are looking for Pan. Pan has been missing. And in the series, spoiler alert, he will eventually die, and Grover witnesses the death of Pan. And this is a big deal because in our real world history, the death of Pan generally is an actual quote unquote historical event that people referenced. And it came about in the early 40s to 50s AD because the idea was that Pan died when Jesus was born. So the Judeo-Christian faith was starting to take hold, and people were kind of pushing out older, quote unquote, barbaric or at that point, pagan faiths, which did include many of the Greek deities. And with that, the death of Pan to many people represented the death of the Greek pantheon as a whole, the Greek and Roman pantheons, which is kind of interesting. And it's through that, with all the different depictions of Pan, who is always depicted as a goat person with the goat legs, that converges with the other nature spirits. Because Pan is another god that, like, so many different religions throughout history have had nature deities. And in this region in particular, they all overlap very heavily. And that's how you get a variety of depictions of Pan that share a lot of these goat like features. Well, it gets more interesting because fauns, the Roman equivalent of a satyr, didn't. This isn't one of those things where we started with satyrs in Greek mythology and then we went into Roman mythology and we just needed a new Latin word for the thing. Fauns are a completely different thing. Fauns are originally ghosts. They're related to the Roman god of Faunus, and Faunus, also not a goat person, but his wife slash daughter, depending on where you read it, Fauna, was a goat person, as was Pan. So that's how Faunus gets kind of looped into those. And fauns were ghosts of rustic places. They were like the ghosts of the wilderness. And then eventually, those two ideas, fauns and satyrs, were merged into this single idea. The fauns were then depicted in the same kind of way as satyrs. However, fauns in traditional Roman myth were actually also depicted as foolish. So a very like harmless stupid, whereas satyrs are often depicted in a much more vulgar, detrimental, antagonistic way throughout a lot of Greek mythology. The reason I find all of this interesting is because in this world, especially once we go meet the Romans in New Rome, their fauns are foolish. They sit around, they eat their food, and they don't do anything of value. But they also aren't really hurting people, which makes sense. Whereas the Greeks would have seen satyrs. Satyr was literally the same way you might go, he's such a dog. They would say, he's such a satyr. That would be like someone, that's a guy who's hitting on all the girls and he's having zero success. What a satyr. And so it's interesting that at Camp Half-Blood, the satyrs are these protectors and noble figures, when in reality, they're really
They're
not
douches.
in any myth. Yeah, they are. And there was a whole category of play called a satyr play, which was often a cross between a tragedy and a comedy, because satyrs were so stupid it was funny, but also they would only cause problems that would inevitably lead to like their own inconveniences.
That is really funny. It's like Mr. Bean. I don't know if you're a Mr. Bean fan,
Yeah.
but
I have seen some, not a lot, but definitely some. It's 100% that vein. What's really funny is some of these satyr plays that they ended up coming out with were then like retelling of what to them were myths. So the myth of Heracles was always, this story, ancient story. And so you would write a satyr play, and in their satyr play, the satyr would show up, interact with Heracles, and he would be like, "What are you doing here?" And they would make Heracles' life worse. And so then you would start attributing bad things that happened to your heroes and myths as the fault of the satyr that popped into the story, literally representing making bad decisions. It's like hanging a lampshade on. It's what they were doing. That's how they would hang a lampshade on, like, why on earth would Jason taunt his witch of a wife? I'll just put a satyr in there.
That's amazing. I love that.
It's really,
we should bring
really
that
funny.
back. We just
You want to do satyr
we just
plays?
need, and it doesn't even have to be like a satyr. We can modernize, but there should just be some like Joe Schmo that comes into a scene, messes everything up, and it's like the same character among all these different like disparate stories. I love that concept.
I think it would be really fun. I want to see the satyr cut of Oppenheimer.
Wait, so I guess what would they mess up? Is it messed up that the bomb happened? Is it messed up that
Yeah, he'd walk up and be like, "Come on, it's a good idea. Trust me, nothing could go
the
wrong."
bomb was the same.
And then he would give him the formula.
Oh, so Oppenheimer just got the formula. So it wasn't the thing that skyrocketed Oppenheimer into the American, the world zeitgeist, which, ultimately was probably good for him. He was famous because of it, but was bad for the world as a whole. Gotcha. Okay, that's grand. That's a very dark and grand narrative.
But yeah, no, I had far more to say on satyrs than I expected. But that brings us to our next mythological creature that was a pretty key player in this chapter, the old Minotaur. Now, Jack, I know you just rolled right on with it and you're like, yep, that makes sense. Do you know the story of how the Minotaur came to be outside of me having just told you earlier
Well,
today?
you told me that this bull was apparently really hot, and there was a woman,
Yes.
a wife, who just couldn't keep her hands off him.
Yep. So we know the basics. Minotaur, part man, part bull. Simple, right? How do you think you get there? If you guessed part man, part bull, you got it. That's how we got there. The first thing that's kind of interesting is we don't have like any firsthand sources from Crete that we can read. So they had a language. We found documents written in their language. We just have no idea what it says. They didn't speak the same language as any of the other people. We don't have a Rosetta Stone. We know nothing. But we have a lot of their art, and they were really wealthy. So we know a lot of people that worked with them, and we know therefore they found bulls sacred, and usually people didn't like them because they had a lot of pirates. So that's not like super important, but that's kind of the basis for what we know about the culture that we get the myth, which is a specifically very Greek myth. The Minotaur is a Greek creation about the Minoans. So it's probably actually meant to frighten people of the Minoans. It's probably meant to be racist, just to put that out there. So anyhow, the king of Crete, Minos, he's competing with his brothers to become king, and he's like, hey, Poseidon, you're like kind of cool and related to me through ways that I didn't take notes on because they're not really relevant. Can you give me something to make these people want me as their king as opposed to my brothers? And Poseidon's like, yeah, sure, man, I owe you a favor. And he gives him this really pretty white bull. It is always specifically described as like, yes, it is a hot white bull. And all of the people of Crete see this bull and they're like, oh, yeah, that is a hot bull. That man should be king. That is genuinely how this guy becomes king. On top of that, he's supposed to sacrifice the bull to Poseidon when he's done. Because Poseidon gave him this really cool bull, and he's supposed to get rid of it, give it back to the gods, and that's how he's supposed to do it. Sacrifice it in Poseidon's temple. Well, he's like, well, this bull just made me king. I'm not going to get rid of it. This thing's super valuable and so hot. Why would I get rid of this really hot bull? So he swaps it out with any other random bull and sacrifices that to Poseidon. Poseidon, not so dumb. So he's like, hey, that's not the bull I gave you. Hey, Aphrodite, you see Pasiphae down there? Yeah, Pasiphae, I'm going to switch all the time. I apologize. Pasiphae is Minos' wife. She's going to fall in love with that really hot bull. And Aphrodite's like, cool, seems like a fair punishment. I'm down. And so it is. And so Pasiphae falls in love with the bull. She then goes to Daedalus. You know
I do.
Daedalus. I know Daedalus, creator of the labyrinth. And this is before the labyrinth exists, because at this point, a Minotaur does not exist yet. And she says, you are a genius inventor. You can create everything. I need you to find me a way that this bull will have sex with me. And so he does. He makes a fake bull out of wood that is hollow so that Pasiphae can climb inside
God.
and the bull will. Yes.
I almost would rather it was just she screwed the bull. Like, there was no weird contraptions. I don't like tools. I don't like that there were tools involved. Subterfuge?
Would you like to know why they make the bull?
Well,
It's because they make Pasiphae fall in love with the bull. But the bull has done no wrong, so the
I was
bull
gonna
isn't
say,
forced to
is
fall in
the
love with
bull's
Pasiphae.
just not into it?
The bull's not into it. So Pasiphae genuinely tries to hit on the bull, and it doesn't work. She's just like, I gotta change my tactic. He's into other cows. So I need to look like a bull. And that's how you get a hollow wooden bull so that Pasiphae can have sex. And I mean, there you go. That's how we get half man, half bull. Like I said, pretty straightforward. The problem is it's an affront against nature.
Yeah, you don't
So it
say.
eats people because that's what affronts against nature
Oh,
do.
you mean the
Um,
child is an affront against nature? Okay,
yes.
I thought you
Yep.
were talking about the whole act in general.
Oh no, Zeus does that all the
But
time.
that's a god.
Yeah. So it's okay when he does
Yeah.
it. Exactly. But when the human did it, it was like weird. So you have to punish them for actually having the kid and everything. So the Minotaur eats people. Like that's the reasoning. It's It's this creature, crime against nature, so it can't eat what cows eat, and it can't eat what humans eat. It has to eat people.
But
And so Minos is like, what do I do? You have thoughts?
I mean, if we want to split hairs, I mean, people can eat people. It's not,
That's
not
true.
unheard of. And I feel like if they really put their mind to it, a cow could probably eat a person too. I don't know how good it would be for them, but I just don't know that either of those are out of the question. Continue.
You know, I don't think you're wrong. I think what's important is that the Minotaur specifically only eats people. And this is a problem. And Minos is like, what do I do with this? My wife just had a child that is half bull. And so he does what any reasonable person at this time in history does. He goes to the Oracle of Delphi.
I mean, all right. Now,
If someone's going to have an answer.
you laugh at that. Honestly, most reasonable thing he could have done outside of just straight up like throwing it off a
Oh,
cliff.
yeah.
If that happened to me, bro, I'd be looking at it like I need some divine intervention. Like I could use some direction right now.
Oh, and notably, in Greek culture, killing your family is like one of the biggest no-nos that you could ever do. So Minos smartly does not throw
That's
it like off a
beautiful,
cliff. He's
though.
not like, oh, I know. how
That's
to get rid of
beautiful
this.
because that means Minos, who is not the father, was the father that stepped up. He said, I did not, my seed did not produce this abomination, but it's my son. That's
Yup.
beautiful.
And he does. And so he raises him like his own. And the Oracle of Delphi says, hold on, I'm looking into the future. I got a plan for you. You're going to build a giant labyrinth. And that's it. And so he goes back. He's got Daedalus. He's like, remember that request you had for my wife? It's time for repercussions. You shouldn't have made that. So now, because you made that bull, which landed me in this position, you're also going to build this labyrinth. And that's why Daedalus builds the labyrinth. And
He's
then
playing both
they
sides.
put the Minotaur in there.
He's true neutral. He's just like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll make the fuckable bull and I'll make the labyrinth for the mistake. Why not? Sure, just keep paying me.
Yes,
Anyways,
sir.
I gotta
Yes,
go
sir.
hang out with my son. We're gonna go fly.
Specifically. So we'll get to that in book 4, because that's Battle of the Labyrinth when we actually get to meet Daedalus. But the reason that whole thing happens is because after he builds the labyrinth and knows all its secrets, Minos is like, okay, now you can't tell anyone about the secrets of the labyrinth. I don't want people to know about the bull man that's in there. I don't want people to know how to get out of there. So we're going to lock you in this tower and you can never leave. And that leads to that whole thing. And then that brings me to the third myth, which isn't exactly related to what we've been talking about, but it overlaps heavily with the Minotaur's myth. And that is your boy Theseus, founder hero of Athens, child of Poseidon, and all around kind of stupid guy. I say that. Do you know what like Theseus's big failure in life is? Because it's really funny.
Failure in life? If you describe it, I'll probably be like, oh, I didn't realize that was him.
Yeah, so after he kills the Minotaur, he's supposed to go home to his dad, and he's supposed to hang certain sails if he's alive and certain sails if he's dead, so that his dad isn't surprised by the news, so that he like knows as he sees the ship coming into shore, my son's alive. Well, he leaves up the sails that say I'm dead after he kills the Minotaur and is coming home totally alive and safe. And so his dad throws himself off the cliff. Not Poseidon. He's got 2 dads.
How progressive.
Well, he's also got a mom.
Very progressive.
So that's a longer story, but his dad is the king of Athens, has a child with this random woman who maybe was his wife. Well, she was his wife. And then he leaves because they just do that all the time. But he leaves his sandals and his sword under a giant rock. And he says, only a true hero could inherit my throne. And so only if the child can move the boulder and inherit my possessions can he learn of his royal lineage. And so because he's, he does that, and then he has sex with the wife, and then Poseidon also comes down and also has sex with the wife. So Theseus is like child of Poseidon and also this other guy. Yeah, it's complicated.
Dude, mythology is awesome. This is great.
It is. Well, what's really fun is Theseus will actually have a lot of things that actually line up with Percy. notably child of Poseidon. And Percy, he gets to pull from a lot of different mythologies because he's got main character
true.
energy. Let's call a spade
Mhm.
a spade. But hidden royal lineage. Okay, Theseus has that. Percy has a similar sort of thing. He doesn't have to go find sandals and a sword, but he does have to uncover his lineage and discover who his father is. On his way to get to his father, Theseus has to do like 6 trials as he like goes past the entrances to the underworld, and he doesn't fight all of the same things that Percy will fight, but one notably, the last thing that he fights before he arrives home to his father is Procrustes, which is the guy who stretches people out. If you remember from the
Yeah.
show, he's in the mattress store. I mean, he's also in the mattress store in
Yeah,
the book.
that's right.
So Procrustes. Percy notably fights Procrustes right before they enter the underworld, which is when he reunites with his lost mother. Kind of a parallel there. Notably, once Theseus finally does meet his dad, he's like, son, I'm so glad you're home and I'm so glad you're a hero. By the way, I've got this really big problem. You shouldn't have to go solve it, but it is a big problem. Theseus is like, no, I'm a hero. What's the problem? And his dad's like, well, every year the Minoans ask us to send over a whole bunch of children so that they can throw them into the labyrinth and they can get eaten by the Minotaur. And Theseus is like, I'll do it. And his dad's like, please don't. And he's like, no. You've convinced me. I'll go undercover. I'll disguise myself as one of the other children. I'll sneak into the maze. And so he does. And of course, he gets help from Ariadne, who is her own wildly interesting character. He goes, he uses the golden string from Ariadne, the golden yarn, and he fights the Minotaur. He succeeds. His dad jumps off a cliff because he has the wrong sails up. And then
Which, like, dude,
uh,
just like, wait. It's like the Romeo and Juliet thing. Like, dude, just like sit with it for like 5 minutes before you act.
100%. Jack, you are so right. I mean, again, don't even get me started on Theseus. He's actually a moron. After he fights the Minotaur and his dad dies, he and his best friend are like, oh man, as children of important gods, members of the big 3, we are entitled to children of Zeus as our brides. Theseus says Helen of Troy, I'm going to make her my wife. And they kidnap Helen as a child. This is before everything else happens. They kidnap her when she's a child. And Theseus's whole plan is I'll just keep her around until she's old enough to be my wife.
Okay. All right. That's
Now, his
awful.
friend, whose name I don't remember, is like, all right, I'll do you one better. You know who else is a child of Zeus and therefore deserves to be my wife? Persephone.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
She might have a husband
Yeah.
at
Might
this
have.
point.
Yeah. Yep. A pretty important one.
So they go into the
Okay.
underworld, which is another thing that Percy does. They fight Cerberus. It goes well. They're really tired afterward. That's another thing that Percy also does. That's why I bring it up. And they sit down on a rock. Percy doesn't do that. And they literally get stuck and they are chained by magic to these rocks for months until Heracles comes down to do his fight against Cerberus, gets there, and is like, hey, why are those 2 guys just stuck to those rocks? And they're like, please save us. And so Heracles, with his great and powerful strength, pulls Theseus from his rock, goes over to his friend, and then the entire underworld starts to shake. And so Heracles and Theseus are like, sorry, dude, you pissed off Hades. You're stuck here. Have fun dying in the underworld. Oops. And that's pretty much the end of Theseus. Sometimes he's on the Argo, which is another thing Percy does, but there's so many heroes that are on the Argo, so it's like, is that really a Theseus thing more than a
Wait.
Heracles
Hold on.
thing would feel much
What
more
happened with
where
Helen?
that lines
What
up?
happened with baby Helen, little kid Helen?
Oh, well, everyone
Well,
wants to be her
yes.
bride, and she doesn't want to marry Theseus. So eventually, while he's trapped in the
She
underworld,
just
she
left.
leaves.
That's fair. That's a very fair answer.
Well, I can't remember if she leaves or gets kidnapped again.
Okay,
I'll be honest, it wasn't the item of
that's
today's
fair.
research. But yeah, while he's stuck in the underworld for months, she doesn't stick around. The kidnapped child either gets kidnapped again, which
I was
with
going to say
Helen,
that
unfortunately,
seems
feels
right.
more likely.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that's all of everything that Theseus does. Oh, I mentioned don't even get me started on Ariadne, but I will because it's fascinating. So this is the woman that, is the child of Minos, helps Theseus slay the Minotaur. Well, now she's like done a wrong against her family, so she doesn't want to get killed herself. So she leaves with him, and Theseus literally just leaves her on a beach. They have a really romantic
Dang!
where they're like stopped on an island, and then he just leaves her there. And in the original story, that's it. He just
He hit it and
leaves her
quit
there.
it and then left her abandoned on an island? That's wild.
Yup.
What an awful person.
Don't feel that bad for her though. Oh yeah. He
wait,
literally
hold on.
terrible.
Don't feel bad for her.
Don't feel that bad for her though. Because Dionysus feels bad, goes down and is like, "Hey man, I'm so sorry he did that to you. Why don't you come up to my place, be a goddess, and we'll be married for all eternity?" So she gets a new name, becomes a goddess, and is now the bride of Dionysus and gets to live eternally in Olympus. So like genuinely don't feel that bad.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear it worked out for her.
Yeah, it's also later retconned within Greek mythology that it was actually Athena who told Theseus, "Ooh, you gotta go." Like, sorry, she's not yours. But the original version has no mention of that, so it seems like it's one of those things where later on they're just like, the Athenians, he's their like patron of their city, founder hero. So like, we have to make him slightly better, so we'll say Athena told him to do that.
That's not a good look for Athena, though. All right. Awesome.
And that's all of the myths that I think are relevant to this chapter. But it is a big deal that Percy does slay the Minotaur. It's one of those things that like Theseus is able to slay the Minotaur, and that is like a genuinely big deal. This is like people are for years dying and dying and dying to this creature, and it's this unknown monster of the labyrinth. So it's a big deal that he kills it. And that's why it's a big deal that Percy does so as well. But yeah, that's our myth for today. There's some fun.
Lots of sex and scandal this time.
Yeah. I think that is where we are going to call today's episode. Have a good one.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support our content, please be sure to leave a review, share with your friends, and follow us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, this has been Notes from the Oracle.